Hello, everyone. My name is Eric Russell, and welcome to today's Acquisitive Unite event. My area of focus is in Microsoft 365, and today I'm going to be talking about how to unleash productivity with Microsoft Copilot. Before we get started, though, just a couple of reminders here. If you have any questions, please put those in the chat. We'll be able to answer those as we go throughout today's presentation. If you have any questions that don't get answered, don't worry. We'll follow up at the very end of this presentation, so all of your questions will get answered. These recording sessions will be available afterwards, and as always, we do have some really good prizes here for the participants. So thank you for participating. My name, as I said earlier, is Eric Russell. I work within our Microsoft 365 practice, and that means my area of focus is really around SharePoint, OneDrive, Teams, Power Platform, and more recently, Microsoft Copilot. And that's what we're going to be talking about here today, is really how to take advantage of Microsoft Copilot as an AI solution and help boost productivity within the workplace. So I'm going to go ahead and jump right into it. I love to start with this slide because I think it really sets the groundwork for definitions. Now, Microsoft does change the names of its products from time to time. So what you're looking at are some of the current names of the AI products within the Microsoft 365 platform. So that means everything from SharePoint Premium to the left, all the way to the far right where it says Custom Copilot, everything in that dark blue, those are AI capabilities within the Microsoft 365 platform. Now, on the left-hand side, you'll see I have this bookend with ChatGPT. I'll get back to that in just a minute. And on the far right-hand side, you'll see I have it bookended with Custom AI, which is really designed to represent Azure OpenAI services. For the purpose of this conversation, we're going to be talking about Microsoft Copilot and everything in the middle. And so I'm going to start with a definition. Right? When people begin talking to me about Copilot and the framing of that conversation is Microsoft 365, generally speaking, not always, they are lumping Microsoft Teams Premium into that conversation, along with Copilot with commercial data protection, along with the Copilot for Microsoft 365. That's the $30 per user per month license, as well as custom Copilots. Now, why is that? The reason that we oftentimes see those conversations bundled together is because they all offer a very similar user experience. It's that chatbot-like experience where people can interface with the chatbot in a human language and get a human response back, right? Human relatable response back. Now, SharePoint Premium is definitely an AI solution, very, very specific to automatic classification. OCR reading is a very, very powerful tool, but its interface is not as familiar as that chatbot interface. And so that's why we put a box around Copilot and put some quotes around it. So that's what we're going to be focusing on today. Now, if I had to characterize where most of our clients are at in terms of beginning to roll out Microsoft Copilot, it is starting with the use cases. And you'll see I advanced the slide here to show some classification here, because the most common question I get is, what is Copilot good at out the box? And specifically, we're referring to those capabilities within Teams Premium, Copilot with commercial data protection, and Copilot for Microsoft 365. And the answer is it's really, really good at what I'm going to refer to as personal assistant use cases. Those are the use cases that make an individual more personally productive so that they can get more work done. So, for example, in Microsoft Teams Premium, there's a capability there that allows for meeting summarization. That makes the individual more personally productive because they do not have to capture those notes while engaging in the meeting. Copilot with commercial data protection is a version of Copilot that uses the web to answer the question, but it has a key security feature to it. So unlike ChatGPT, where if you ask ChatGPT a question, it is going to use that data and put it in the public domain, Copilot with commercial data protection will not do that. So you can use company data in the prompt, the question or the query that you're asking. Now, it will use the web to answer the question, but it will not take any company data that's in that prompt and place it within the public domain. That is a key difference between Copilot with commercial data protection and ChatGPT. In fact, we oftentimes recommend that our clients use Copilot with commercial data protection instead of ChatGPT for that very reason. Now, Copilot for Microsoft 365 is different in that it's available in Word, Excel, PowerPoint, Teams, and Outlook, whereas Copilot with commercial data protection is just available in the Edge browser. But there's also another key difference here, and that is that Copilot for Microsoft 365 will use your tenant data in order to answer the question. So it'll use files, documents, chat, messages, and email to answer the question. So it is entirely possible that you can take the exact same question. You can ask Copilot with commercial data protection the answer to that question. It'll use the web to answer that question. But if you take that same prompt or same query and you ask Copilot for Microsoft 365, you'll get a more internal answer. It'll use company data that the individual has access to. Two very, very good capabilities of AI within the Microsoft platform. Both of them are called Copilot, but they use different data sources to answer the question. Again, Copilot with commercial data protection is going to use the web. Copilot for Microsoft 365 is going to use your data that is in your Microsoft 365 tenant. Now, I have all three of those: Teams Premium, Copilot with commercial data protection, and Copilot for Microsoft 365 labeled as personal assistant use cases. And that's true. I'll give an example here. There are two use cases that I use quite often in my day-to-day job. I'm on a lot of calls where we are talking about technology and solutioning. And so generally the way those calls go is that we're listening to the business problem and we're trying to understand what we are solving. We're then talking about some technology alignment around what could solve that problem or how we might address that. In the past, I would have to take notes while I was on the call. And so I always felt like that while I was taking notes, I was somewhat distracted, especially at the very, very beginning of pure remote work. I felt like I was oftentimes splitting my time between the camera and looking at my notes, and I didn't feel like I was preparing myself for the next question that I need to ask. I felt like I was writing down the notes, and sometimes I would get lost and just have to ask myself, where am I at in the conversation? I no longer have to do that. I can rely solely on Copilot to take the notes for me. Right. So for me, I feel like that improves the quality of my engagement. I feel like I can focus on the conversation and not on the tactical need of being able to just transcribe the notes. So for me, I feel like that improves my quality in terms of being able to actively listen and ask the right questions as we go about solving or solutioning for a particular business challenge. The second thing that I use it for is I take those exact notes that were transcribed and I use Copilot to write executive summaries or project charters or statements. And the way that works is I just take that transcript, I put it into Copilot, and I say, write me a 3 to 4 sentence executive summary that will summarize the following key points, show me, what is the business problem we are solving, was the outcome we want, and what are the technologies that we were looking to solution. And so Copilot will help draft that for me. That saves me time. And so I become the editor of that content as opposed to the author and editor of that content. So there's some time savings achieved for me there. But both of those use cases make me personally more productive. And so that's why I refer to those as personal assistant use cases. We'll also talk a little bit about some of the departmental use cases, and we will dive a little bit into enterprise use cases. But the key point here is that those use cases are designed as essentially applications for others to use to solve or address a specific use case or need that a Copilot license will not directly address. And so as we begin to move beyond personal assistant use cases into more departmental use cases or more enterprise use cases, we'll bring different tools to bear to solve those problems. All right, so I'm going to move on from this slide here. We're going to talk a little bit about where the market is at today. And there was a bit of a watermark moment in January. I think it was January 15th when Microsoft removed a minimum license purchase for Microsoft Copilot. Prior to January 15th, you had to buy 300 licenses in order to get access to the tool. For those of you who are doing math quick in your head, $30 per user per month times a 12-month commitment, that's a $100,000 investment just to get your hands on the tool to be able to explore how it would work. Now, Microsoft has removed that minimum. So you can buy just a handful of licenses now. And so what that's done is that has opened up organizations to be able to begin to pilot Copilot for Microsoft 365 before doing a more broad rollout. So it's making it more affordable for people to engage in understanding how the tool works and the value it can bring to its organization. And generally speaking, we're seeing two types of pilot. And that's really the message of this slide is what is the market embracing? It's embracing readiness and pilots to begin to understand how Copilot is going to provide a return on investment to their organization. $30 per user per month is a modest price, but it's $360 a year for a person. So there are oftentimes intentional decisions about making that purchase. So pilots are the way that people are ascertaining value. Now, there's generally two types of pilots that we're seeing. We're seeing what I will refer to as an IT pilot or a limited pilot, where a handful of licenses are purchased, maybe 2 to 5, 10 at the most. And they are deployed internally within either the IT organization, security organization, a very controlled group, because they want to begin to learn how the tool is going to discover content to see if there's any changes in their technical readiness that they need to apply. I'll talk more about that later. I refer to it as an IT pilot or limited pilot. But what most organizations are looking at doing is they're looking at expanding beyond that to what I'll refer to as an early adopter pilot, where you begin to invite business stakeholders to use the tool. And so there are some things that you can do to prepare for an early adopter pilot. And one of them is you can begin to understand your technical prerequisites. Now, I've only got one slide on this because there is a lot of documentation that's available online. But generally speaking, you want to make sure you got check marks on all of the items listed on the left-hand side. So M365 apps, Entra ID, OneDrive, etc. You want to make sure that you have a valid deployment of these technologies so that you're getting check marks on the right-hand side. There are additional technical prerequisites beyond this, including certain URLs that you'll want to make sure that you are not blocking. But generally speaking, all of this information is online. Whenever we help our clients prepare for an early adopter pilot, we start here. We start with the technical prerequisites. This includes licensing as well, just to make sure that you have the ability to deploy licensing to employees. So the message here is look at your technical prerequisites, make sure you're getting check marks on the right-hand side. That's the first thing we recommend. The second thing that we recommend in preparing for an early adopter pilot is what I'll refer to as use case identification. And use case identification, to simplify it, is simply identifying what is Microsoft Copilot good at out of the box? What are the use cases that it can do like that? And in order to answer that question, we have to first identify who are good candidates for an early adopter pilot. If you are looking for a place to start, these are the departments that we would suggest you start with and begin inviting into an early adopter pilot, right? So there's two reasons for this. So you got finance, IT, sales, human resources, and marketing. But there are two reasons why we recommend you start with these 5 departments. Now, this isn't to say you limit it to just these 5, but if you're looking for a place to start, these are the 5 that we would suggest. And the reason we do that is for 2 reasons. Number one, what Copilot is really good at, it is good at content generation, content summarization, and it is good at creating documents, summarizing emails. It is really, really good at a lot of back office functions that these departments do a lot of. Finance, IT, sales, human resources, and marketing have a lot of use cases where they are either creating content, editing content, they are summarizing content, and they are also the primary users of the Office applications. Now, this is where Copilot is available. It's available in Word, Excel, PowerPoint, Teams, etc. And these departments use those applications. And so it is a natural fit for these departments to have the potential to get the most impact out of a Copilot license. So we would recommend you start here. Now, the second thing is, within each one of these, within each one of these departments, what are some of the typical use cases that a Copilot license can address? Now, there is an amazing resource that's available to you. I'm going to point your attention to the bottom left-hand corner of this slide. You'll see a reference there. It's called the Microsoft Copilot Scenario Library. This is an online resource that's available to you. Microsoft has done a really good job of taking a deep look at HR, finance, IT, marketing, sales. There's even a few other departments out there around operations. There's also one around communications, internal communications. And they have put together a deck. It looks very similar to what you're seeing on the screen here today. And they begin to go through what can Copilot help with as it relates to HR. So if you look in the middle of the screen there, you see Copilot can assist with, and then you'll see a list of activities. We suggest that you use this resource. This is a resource that we use whenever we are preparing our clients for a early adopter pilot. Again, it's publicly available. Microsoft does a really good job of updating this content. And there are decks and use cases available for HR, marketing, sales, finance, IT, and more. And so what we would suggest is that you use this collateral and you hold what we would refer to as an Art of the Possible workshop, right? An Art of the Possible workshop is nothing more than identifying who your early adopter pilot participants are going to be and inviting them into a working session and sharing with them that we anticipate that Copilot will be able to help you in these areas of your job. I'll tell you one way not to facilitate an Art of the Possible workshop. Do not invite people from the various business units into a room and ask them how they're going to use Copilot. Few people will know how to answer that question. Instead, use these decks as a way to show or illustrate these are the ways that Copilot can help, and then allow those stakeholders to choose the ones that are most relevant to their role or their job within the organization. That has the benefit, that has two benefits. The first is that it is going to immediately engage those business stakeholders in a place to start with Copilot, right? So one of the things that can be somewhat confusing about Copilot at times is that you can use Copilot in Word and or Excel and or PowerPoint and or Teams. And so oftentimes people just need a place to start. Well, if I'm in Microsoft Word most of my day, then I'm going to be interested in the use cases that are most applicable in Microsoft Word and align those to my role. And these decks will help with that conversation. It also helps with communications and training so that when you assign a license to your early adopter pilot participants, you can follow that up with communications and training that's tailored to the interest that they showed in the Art of the Possible workshop. And so use case identification, kind of putting a bow on this, is a key part of enablement here, because while the technical prerequisites are necessary to get started, in my opinion, the most important part is the use case identification portion of this journey and helping people understand how they can use the tool within their job. These decks do a great job of it. And then you follow it up with the right communication and training to support them after you have assigned them a license. And so that's use case identification. That's the second part. And the third part, pardon me, let these prompts, I'll put this here. This is a great resource just into some common prompts that we see. These are very, very common across all of those departments. You'll get a lot of use out of these. So I'll leave this here for reference. These are the top 10 prompts that we always like to provide visibility into. So if you're looking for a sense of what is Copilot good at, these prompts are really, really good. Copilot does a very an effective job utilizing this content. All right, let's move on to technical readiness real quick. This is the third part of how we would suggest you prepare for an early adopter pilot. So if the first part is technical prerequisites, the second part is use case identification, the third part is technical readiness. Now, with technical readiness, what do we mean by that? What are we reacting to? I'm going to start with a Gartner survey here. This Gartner survey is specific to Copilot. It's dated in February. I didn't participate in this poll, simply read the report here to get a sense for where people's heads are at in terms of risk with Copilot. So why would people hold back from assigning a license? And it is that number one bar in that bar chart up there. It's oversharing, or the potential for having content that is overshared or exposed, and that content becomes available to employees. Now, why are people sensitive to this? The reason that they're sensitive to this is because if you begin to do a little bit of research on Copilot, you'll realize it's using a different index. It's not using what's referred to as a keyword index. It's using a semantic index. And a semantic index is a more powerful index. Some would say it's designed to read the intent of the employee. So it's going to provide more meaningful information back. So rather than just latch on to the keywords and call it a day, it will try to identify content that the user hasn't specifically asked for, but might be relevant to the context of the prompt, the query that's being asked. And so that has the potential to reach into areas that the employee has no intent of finding information. There's no malicious intent here to find information they shouldn't have access to. But if there are configurations within your tenant or sensitive information that's been overexposed, Copilot might surface that information and bring it into the user experience. Then it becomes very difficult for the employee to then ignore the information once it's in front of them. So this is why that is the number one concern or number one risk. Now, this is a survey, so this is just getting people's feelings on the matter. Our security team has acknowledged this risk. So at Quisitive, we do a lot of security assessments, and we have validated that risk is real, but it does depend, obviously, on your own security posture. But these are some of the things that we see. So whereas if the previous slide was a Gartner survey and their experience, this is our experience. So we still do a lot of security assessments where we discover that the defaults are still everyone and anonymous. Even in cases where those are changed, we still see that there is a lot of content, sensitive records that may be shared in this way. And then that's typically not a desired state. The concept of security by obscurity, so you having hidden locations, maybe it's not part of the intranet navigation or part of any other navigation, and you've got some looser permissions around it, Copilot is going to find that content. So if you have any of those in your environment, we call that security by obscurity. Copilot is going to break that wall down, right? No longer is it going to be, I'm not even going to say good enough, but no longer is it going to be a strategy to just have those locations out there hidden. Copilot is going to pick those locations up. Again, it's using a different index. The external threat, insider threat, data exfiltration risks, these are all things that existed before Copilot. So I don't want to suggest that these are new risks. But as you begin to think about your strategy with Copilot, MFA is going to take a higher level priority, right? So most organizations have already deployed MFA to all of their employees. If you're an organization that has not done that, we would suggest that you do that. If you need to take a middle step, we would suggest that any Copilot license assignment have MFA, right? Specifically to cut down on the external threat risk. So again, MFA across the board. The other two, insider threat risk, data exfiltration, those really come down to sensitivity labels, right? And M365 and applying sensitivity labels to the right content. Now, sometimes I get asked, what is sensitive content? That is a definition that your organization will need to define, but generally speaking, there is, public content, private content, and confidential content, where you want to really lock down the people who can see that information. You can, of course, apply more granular or specific definitions to your sensitivity labels, but if you're looking for a place to start, public, private, and confidential is a good place to start. The next question would be, well, where is sensitive content typically stored? And generally speaking, it's HR, finance, legal. Those three organizations tend to have sensitive content that you would want to apply some type of labeling strategy or data classification strategy to. So again, the reason you're doing that is insider threat risk and data exfiltration risk, right? So This is just some of our experiences. We do security assessments. We do see that there are areas of improvement for being able to classify your sensitive document, and that's just going to make the Copilot experience more effective, but it'll also reduce that risk. Copilot's going to respect the rules of sensitivity labels, and so I sometimes get the question, well, what are my options depending on licensing? I love this slide because what it does is it kind of clearly shows that you can address sensitivity labels regardless of your licensing, right? So yes, you may have to do manual sensitivity labels. If you have an E5 license, you may be able to use Purview in order to automatically discover this content. But the point of this slide is just to communicate that you can secure and govern your content in M365. Right? Some of the licensing makes it easier to do that. SharePoint Advanced Management, one of my favorite features of that particular tool is it allows you to apply sensitivity labels automatically to a document library, right? So that's a way for you to kind of make your physical structure align to how you want to classify documents, and that's a great starting point. But SharePoint Advanced Management is going to make it easier for you to do that. There are other ways without that tool to be able to do that, of course, but love this slide just to be able to communicate you can secure and govern your content, right? Regardless of your licensing level. It's just a matter of convenience and whether or not you want to automatically apply some of those labels. So technical readiness is going to be the third part. All right, so let me kind of wrap all this up. I'm going to talk a little bit about custom Copilot. So what we just talked about was technical prerequisites, use case identification, and technical readiness. Those are the three things that we would recommend before you deploy licensing to an employee, right? So that is a series of use cases that when we get into custom Copilots, that's those personal use cases, right? So whether it's a Microsoft Teams Premium license, whether or not you're enabling Copilot with commercial data protection for your tenant, or whether or not you're assigning licensing for Copilot for Microsoft 365, those personal assistant use cases, right? Identify the use cases, cover off on the technical prerequisites, address your technical readiness. That is what I'm going to refer to as a buy decision. You are buying a license or enabling technology you're already licensed for to specifically address a series of use cases for HR, IT, finance, sales, marketing, or any other department that you invite into the Art of the Possible workshop. That's a buy decision. But as you go through this exercise, you will discover use cases that a Microsoft Copilot license will not directly address. And those are your build use cases. If you remember in the previous slide here, those are your departmental and your enterprise use cases. Those are things that you are going to have to build. So whether that is a custom chatbot or you are looking at building an entire AI platform, Microsoft has you covered in those technologies. And generally speaking, the way people begin to think about their options here is they think about it in terms of the IDE. Which tool should I use in order to address the use case? There's a couple different lenses you can look at this. Your custom Copilots, Copilot Studio, and low code is one option. Or you can use Azure AI Studio and have full control over the solution. Okay, so custom Copilot, Copilot Studio low code, full control would be your Azure AI Studio. And that's going to be using Azure OpenAI. Now there is middle ground in between, and that's actually shown, it's shown on the next slide actually, where you can still use Copilot Studio, but bring in Azure OpenAI models. But that's a gray area. And it tends to be then choice as to which IDE you want to use. But generally speaking, low code, custom Copilot, Copilot Studio, full control, Azure AI Studio. All right, so what are some candidates for custom Copilots? I'm not going to read this list to you. I'll just let you read that. But as you do read that, you're going to see a theme that's jumping off the page there. And generally speaking, when you begin to get into requirements where integration with your M365 data with other data systems, that's going to pull you into the other solutions, Okay, so if you are the very first one there, pull in employee information from an HR system. It's going to be a custom Copilot, right? Include project brief, including data from emails, competitive research, and financial records. That information may be in your tenant. You may want to also go to the web to find some of that research as well and pull that into a model. So again, I'm not going to read every bullet point to you, but there's a theme here. And that is the more complex your data footprint becomes, the more places you go to gather data and pull it into the model and answering the question, the more that you begin to move into a custom Copilot. So then the question becomes, well, what do I use? This is the slide I was referring to earlier. Which do I use, Copilot Studio or Azure AI Studio? You'll see that there is some overlap here between the two. As I mentioned earlier, you can create an Azure OpenAI model, and you can bring that into a Copilot Studio development experience, right? So the thing that I will highlight here is that while you can do that, there's a big value proposition just within Copilot Studio and being able to stay within the generative AI capabilities that tool provides. And that is around what I'm going to refer to as generative answers. Actually, I'm not referring to this. This is Microsoft's terminology. Generative answers is a out-of-the-box generative AI solution that Copilot Studio fully supports. So what does that mean? Generative answers is essentially a black box, meaning you don't get full control, but you also don't get the full expense of using a large language model that's hosted in Azure, right? So you don't get to choose your large language model. In this case, you're going to get 3.5 Turbo. It is going to be hosted on an internal Azure OpenAI services, but you're going to be licensing it slightly differently. In fact, if you go back and review this recording, the very beginning, there was a different licensing model for Copilot Studio and generative answers than there was for Azure services. It does implement the RAG architecture. It has some limitations in terms of number of turns of conversations and results that are being shown, but it's a very, very quick win. Again, low code solution. So Copilot Studio generative answers can be your quick hit if you are looking at building a custom Copilot on a very specific set of data within your M365 tenant, or maybe you want to use a graph connector to pull some of that information in to be part of that RAG architecture. Copilot Studio would allow you to do that. But Copilot Studio is just part of the answer. You will likely discover use cases that require full control over the large language model, full control over the services you want to bring to bear, and that's where an AI platform comes into play. Now, as I show you this slide, the thing I will point out is that when you begin to move into more complex AI solutions, not everything on this slide is Microsoft. Right. So you will notice there are a number of Azure services listed on here, but there are also a number of other services listed on here as well. And so this is when you begin to get into machine learning and you begin to get into very complex use cases. Maybe precision is something that you need as part of a use case. And you're looking to be as precise as possible, and you want to use Python to help do that. This is where you begin to get into a generative AI platform. And if you think about the story that we just kind of talked through here, we talked about it all depends on the use cases. The use case will lead you to the answer. And so some of those use cases are going to lead you to a Copilot license. You'll buy that solution. Some of them are going to lead you to a low-code solution in Copilot Studio. And some of those use cases are going to lead you to an AI platform and using Azure OpenAI services in order to solve that challenge, as well as other services that are available to you. Now, what I just described here, I'm going to bring this back to Microsoft Copilot real quick, because what I just described and everything about Microsoft Copilot is everything in that foundation stage. So if you recall earlier, a lot of clients are looking at early adopter pilots to ascertain the value of Copilot for their organization, right? So they're looking at the $30 per user per month license, and they're thinking, okay, if I do buy that license, What value am I going to get to it? Pilots are an answer to that question. So to do that, we would recommend that before you assign that license, that you do some due diligence around technical prerequisites, use case identification, and technical readiness. That technical readiness can also include that IT pilot. Remember I said earlier, there are two pilots, IT pilot and early adopter pilot. That IT pilot can support you in the foundation phase. We would recommend that you do those three activities before you assign a Copilot license. Then after you assign a Copilot license, you get into the pilot adopt stage. And you'll notice here that I do have adoption readiness, Copilot rollout, and even live prototyping up there. And I do want to give you a sense of what that looks like as well. So this next slide is going to show you some activities. Let's assume for a minute you've covered off on your technical prerequisites. You understand the use cases and who you're going to deploy the licensing to. You've done your technical readiness. You're good to go there. What are some of the steps that we would recommend or that you can take to have a successful pilot and adopt phase? And I'll leave this slide here and just talk to it broadly, but there is some detail here on this slide. So please, if you want to, take a screenshot of it. These are just steps that we would recommend you do. Coming out of the foundation phase, this is when we recommend you start planning your adoption. Adoption would be identifying your goals of your pilot, what returns you're looking for. So that could be increased quality. You could be looking at just usage. Are people using the tool as a measure of success? You could look at sentiment. Do people like the tool or not like the tool? Does it make their life easier or harder? We refer to that as sentiment. Time savings can always be part of that equation as well. Efficiency. How efficient are people in using the tool? So those are some metrics that you can measure as your pilot. That adoption and readiness phase is where you identify those, and then you just build your communication and training to go along with it. So awareness campaigns or FAQs or anything that you want to send along with the license assignment. And then the Copilot rollout, if you look at those activities over there in the middle column, you'll notice that by and large, this is a change management project. If you look closely in the middle there, it's about just below the halfway fold, you'll see a row that says assign licensing, period, and execute the adoption plan. What that means is that everything above that and everything in adoption readiness, we would recommend that you do before the license assignment. Now, sometimes you don't have the luxury of time to be able to cover off on those activities in that order, but we would certainly recommend that as part of any a rollout that you put some consideration around informing your help desk that these licenses are going out and assigning permissions to the usage report beforehand. So again, there's some thought and intention here into the order of the activities that are on this slide. Adoption readiness first, Copilot rollout second. You do those two activities plus the foundation topics that we talked about earlier, and you will have a successful early adopter rollout. And then the custom use case live prototyping is designed for those departmental and enterprise use cases, right? So these are the build use cases. So the first two support the buy use cases, but if you're going to begin building your own custom Copilots or AI platform, we suggest you start with prototyping, and we suggest you do that prototyping in your environment so you can have complete control over your data. So this is something that we do help our clients with. We bring the prototyping environment to our clients' environments. Our clients bring their data, and then we begin to test the modeling and ask it questions, because what we're really looking for in that live prototyping session are some architectural decisions around, are we going to solve this with a low-code solution, or are we going to solve this with a full control solution? So something like Azure OpenAI. And those are the recommended activities. So just to summarize again, what I've spent most of the time talking about here in this session is around the foundation. What are the things that you can do to prepare for an early adopter pilot for Microsoft Copilot? It's everything in the foundation stage. I did want to share some insight into what we would recommend next. And so that's this slide here, adoption readiness, Copilot rollout. And then, of course, if you have any custom use cases, that would be the live prototyping. Certainly appreciate everyone's time today. If you want to learn more about Quisitive's Copilot services, you can certainly click on this QR link here, and you can get some more information about that. And as a reminder, if you have any further questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. We're always available and happy to help. This Copilot journey and this whole AI journey is really, really exciting. There's a lot of opportunity. I hear a lot of people say it's not an if, it's a when. So if you would like to talk to us further about options in terms of how to go about your AI strategy, whether that's deploying Copilot or building a custom solution, we're more than happy to answer those questions. And with that, I'll conclude. Thank you so much for your time today. I hope you found this session to be very, very informative and very useful. Once again, my name is Eric Russell, work for Quisitive, and thank you for your time. Cheers.